Hello and welcome to Autistic FM. My name is Haje. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the mechanic that keeps this mechanism well greased. It's good to have you here with us today. You can subscribe to Autistic FM wherever you get your podcasts, and it would be really sweet if you did. Over on our website on autistic.fm, you can find episode transcripts and additional information about each episode. We also have discussion threads for each episode, a Neurospicy discussion forum, and much, much more. And all of that is free. You can also consider becoming a supporter for as little as $5 a month. This supports the podcast and allows you to get a sneak preview of upcoming topics, submit questions for our guests, suggest future topics, and join a supporters-only discussion group. Plus, we have a bunch of additional supporter treats on the horizon, so stay tuned. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of talking to Libby, a dedicated therapist who uses her expertise to support autistic adults. Libby shares insight into her journey, going from a misunderstanding of her own neurodivergent identity, all the way to providing neuro-affirming care for others. We dive into the realms of neurodiversity, therapy modalities, how to best support neurodivergent people, and through Libby's story, we explore mental health challenges, sensory sensitivities, and how self-discovery leads to a better support and understanding, both personally and professionally. A quick trigger warning. This episode does touch on sensitive topics, including childhood trauma, self-injury, mental health struggles, dissociative experiences, and there are some mentions of domestic violence and sexual assaults. There's no graphic detail in this episode, but please do look after yourself. Listener discretion, as they say, is advised. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's listen to Libby and roll the tape. Hello and welcome back to Autistic FM. I am joined today by a guest that I've been so excited to have on. We've had to reschedule a couple of times, but here we are, and I'm psyched. My dear, wonderful guest, what is your name and what pronouns do you use?
My name is Libby Banks, and I use she, they pronouns.
Wonderful. She, they, do you prefer one over the other?
No, either is perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. Where in the world are you?
I am in Texas.
Awesome. And what is your history with neurospiciness? Where do you fall on the spectrum? Lay it on us.
So I have complex lore, actually. So I have been formally diagnosed twice, which is fun and interesting. I was first diagnosed as a child with pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. I was diagnosed with that at the age of 4. No one told me. That is not something that I was aware of for the vast majority of my life, though I did receive occupational therapy. Yeah, very interesting.
It feels like a tidbit that somebody at some point would have mentioned to you, but
you would think. And I was a child, so I didn't really think a lot about like why I was getting pulled out for occupational therapy and things like that. And at some point, those services stopped. And then later on, as an adult, my nephew was diagnosed as autistic. And at that point, my younger sister was like, "Hey, Libby, And
y'all are basically twins."
Pretty much. And I was at that point, I was a therapist. I was like, no, I would know. And all the ableist things, all the things that you would say if you were a person who had really not started to unpack that thing.
Right.
I was still very much on I'm a highly sensitive person, that journey, but I had not started to unpack that at all.
It's one of those, yeah, totally makes sense. It turns out Nile is a beautiful river in Egypt and also a place we all swim.
Yes. And I had not really unpacked, why am I so good at working with autistic people? Like, that was just not a question I had really ever really sat with in any kind of intense way. And so then the pandemic happened and I was in the clinic and a lot of stuff started to happen. I started to have meltdowns again. I started to have really intense sensory sensitivities again because I went straight into autistic burnout and it was a lot. And so at that point I self-diagnosed and then I had really good insurance. And so I was able to get a formal diagnosis. Yeah, so that was in 2021, and here we are.
Oh gosh, there's so many things to pick up on there. Before we dive into the kind of the meat of it all, what does a meltdown look like for you?
So for me, it looks like a total loss of control, which is a really interesting experience as someone who is typically very in control. And I would say for me, it is typically a lot of tearfulness, a lot of yelling, a lot of self-injury. I have a lot of self-injury stems that tend to start whenever I'm having a meltdown. So I will hit myself a lot, sometimes hit my head. And and it will not be over until it's over. And it feels really scary and intense when it's happening.
Yeah.
And not understanding what is happening makes it way scarier. Now that I know what it is.
Right. You're like, just write it out kind of thing?
Yeah. And hey, let's hide under my weighted blanket. Let's accommodate it, right? And especially knowing that, oh, if I don't have one of these, I'm going to go into a shutdown or a shame spiral. Much better to have the 45-minute meltdown than go into shutdown for 3 days or have a shame spiral for a week. I didn't know I was having meltdowns. It just felt like I was having a temper tantrum over lights being too bright. And that is something that is so easy to pathologize.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. The first meltdown I ever had where I was like, wait a minute, this is not normal behavior. This was also during the pandemic. I had made a massive batch of soup. Basically, one of the farms local to me had like tons of tomatoes, and I had all these tomatoes, and it was like, oh, this is amazing, like 3 crates of tomatoes. So I made this enormous batch of soup, and I had this fridge freezer, and I carried 6 of the pint containers of soup down the stairs. I stumbled slightly because it turns out I'm autistic and very clumsy. Luckily, the soup wasn't hot, but it fell, and the containers fell on the stairs. They splattered everywhere, and they broke. And I just sat down and I cried for and I was like, why? Like, why am I crying over spilled soup? But also, it was one of those things where I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is not a normal behavior. This is not a normal response to dropping some soup. Right?
But it's a deeply normal one for an autistic person.
It turns out, yeah, because I'd spent all day making all this stuff, and I was so proud of myself for. I had a stretch of being vegan, and making vegan soup is a lot harder than making it good. Is a lot harder than making omnivore soup, and yeah, I just fell apart, and I just sat there for 45 minutes on the stairs. And then I ended up calling a friend. I was like, I just cried for a long time after dropping some soup, and something is wrong with me. And it was one of those, they were like, yeah, sometimes maybe you got a little overwhelmed. And I was like, yeah, but this feels different.
And God, so often I have this conversation with my clients where it is just like, hey, this is probably not the thing you want to hear. But meltdowns are an inherent part of our neurotype when we're dysregulated. You trying to keep yourself from having meltdowns, or you pathologizing them or whatever, it's engaging in self-abandonment, right? For you, it is a normal thing. It is like something that is just like a fundamentally like healthy thing to happen in a lot of ways when we are autistic and dysregulated. It is a normal thing to happen for you to have a meltdown about the soup spilling. And I don't say that to invalidate like that experience of how scary it is when we have a meltdown, especially when we're not used to having it, especially when we previously have engaged in all these compensatory behaviors that keep us from having them. But God, I would so much rather you have that meltdown where it is, I need to feel these feelings and have this release than act like it's a bad thing to happen. Does that make any sense?
100%. Yeah. And I didn't have them for many years. I thought what I was having was panic attacks. And some of the circumstances were right. And some of the circumstances where I had them was like, oh, this makes sense that I'm having a panic attack here. But I was a music photographer, right? So right in the front of the pit with 5,000 people behind me, a band on stage, loud music. And the thing is, as long as I was focusing on taking photos, I've taken some amazing music photos in my time. But you only get to take photos for 3 songs. And as soon as I put my camera away, I would be like, oh my God, I can't breathe. Because of course, right? It is loud as hell. There's pyrotechnics in front of me. There's security guards everywhere. There's 5,000 people behind me. And there's a loud, sweaty rock band in front of me. I'm like, yeah, this is not a safe place. I need to get out of here. And I had 3 or 4 shooting engagement in a row where I'd shot my photos and then I had this massive, like, what I thought was a panic attack. And I was like, well, I love this as a career for me, but I can't do this. This is not a good idea.
And what a loss, because if you had been able to accommodate yourself, or if you had understood your needs better, you think about all the loss and these things where if we had needs that were better understood, they're not hard to accommodate. It would be not hard for you to be able to take photos for a set and then for you to bounce or to get out of there when it's safe, right?
100%. Yeah. Or earplugs. I wasn't wearing earplugs. That's even a normal thing to do at a concert, right? So, But I don't know, like nobody else was wearing earplugs. I felt some level of shame, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, so we've skipped and hopped a little bit around, but what I wanted to get to was like, Libby, what wonderful thing do you do for a living?
Okay, I am a therapist and I work with autistic adults mostly. Every once in a while, I'll get an autistic teenager, and my primary specialty is with gifted autistic adults, and especially like late identified autistic adults. So some of my clients were people who have known they are autistic their entire life. And so a lot of people who are fast processors, and a lot of people who have either had their experiences as autistic people, they have been gaslit about those experiences a lot, or are very good at these compensatory behaviors that are like, oh, I'm not autistic because I have a system. And then they get to this point where their systems start to fail. And then that is when they find me.
Right.
So
Well, thank you for doing what you do. That seems super helpful and important.
It's great.
God, for me, there's definitely a pre and post realizing I was autistic. I'm actually doing a formal diagnosis later this week, which I'm excited about. Thank you. I absolutely know where that's going to go. The only question for me is whether or not there is ADHD or not in there. I don't know if that's diagnosable. But it's fascinating, right? This is like something that I am so fundamentally sure about myself. And so this diagnostic process is actually just a curiosity. And really, I'm not going to get accommodations for anything. I'm a grown-ass adult, right? There's nothing really that I can do. The only reason why I want to do this diagnostic thing is I'm running this podcast. And I think it's actually helpful for me to be able to say, look, I knew already and self-diagnosis is 100% valid, but I'm actually curious about what the process is. And I want to go through that. But yeah, for me, there's like this before and after knowing, the moment of gnosis. And after I knew, I spent so much time working with my therapist who, bless her, had no idea really what autism was. But I had to go through and revisit so many key formative moments of my life where I was like, oh, that thing never made sense until I now know what I know about myself. And now it makes sense. And there are dozens of forks in the road where I was just confused and felt broken. And even just re-examining it. Hey, if I look at this situation with the knowledge that I might be autistic, does this situation now make sense? Guess which way that one went time and time again.
How I describe it to my clients is that we are going to be working on the project of recontextualizing your life, right? And that is not an easy project, and especially because we're dealing with alexithymia, we are dealing with pathological demand avoidance. There's a lot of the complicated stuff. If it is two people in therapy and both of us have alexithymia, it is a very big, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king kind of energy. There's a lot of that at play here, right? But I think approaching it with curiosity and also this acknowledgement that the task is hard, I think there's a lot of humility in it and there's a lot of kindness in it. Does that make any sense?
Totally. Yeah. I had this funny conversation with my therapist where at some point she was like, what are you feeling right now? I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Like, you look upset. It's like, I guess I am upset, but I don't know what flavor of upset I am. I'm definitely like, I feel unsafe. I feel like there's some flights, fights, fawn, freeze. Something is going on, but I don't know which one and I don't know why. And I am fascinated by you working with clients who are in the same boat. Oh, we're both sitting here being uncomfortable. Don't really know what it is, but I actually feel like that level of empathy might be super helpful. I don't know. You don't know. Let's figure it out together, kind of thing.
I think it is like a lot of how I describe it to clients sometimes is that it is a dartboard, and I happen to be very good at pattern recognition, and I have a lot of experience throwing darts, but I am very willing to be wrong. It is entirely possible that what I am offering might not resonate. And if that is the case, please tell me. Or if this feels partly right, but doesn't feel precise, tell me, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that, just willingness to be wrong, this willingness to be curious, and just approaching it in this kind of goofy way. And also, this isn't to say that an holistic therapist can't be a good therapist for an autistic client. I would never make that claim.
Right.
The double empathy problem is a thing. And I think a lot of my clients find having someone who understands alexithymia in a bone deep way a really helpful thing, because I am going to understand that asking how are they doing today is a much more difficult question than tell me about your worst childhood trauma.
Right.
It is a much more difficult question for me too.
Yeah, I'm feeling a sense of relief in even listening to you say that. At some point, a friend of mine who works with kids with developmental challenges showed me this chart. You've probably seen it, a round chart that kind of lists all the different emotions: anger, fury, anger. Like it takes the main base emotions and then breaks them down.
Yeah. Feelings wheel.
And feelings wheel, yes, that one.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw that, I was like, wait, have I felt all of these emotions? And I spent like an hour just reading all the way around the edge. Oh yeah, no, I felt that one. Yeah, I think I know what that one is. Yeah, no, I've definitely seen that one. But recognizing them on the fly, I feel like I need regular processing time where I just sit and replay the thing in my head. And every now and again, I have somebody go, oh, if I was in that situation, I would feel anger. I was like, no, that's not anger. That's sadness. I feel sad in this moment because anger doesn't even make sense. Nobody can influence this. I'm not angry with anyone or myself. I am sad that blah, 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 blah. And what I'm realizing is that not only is it hard to recognize my emotions, but a lot of the time my emotions don't make sense to other people. I am sad. I know I'm sad. I know what sad feels like. I've been sad many times. It's so weird.
And I think, so that makes me think of two different things. One is for a lot of my clients, some of the work we will do sometimes is tracking the body signals that tend to go with feelings, right? And it's not a universal thing. And that can be a helpful and a tool that is not helpful. So it will depend on the client. But I do have a feelings wheel that has different body cues on the outside, the outer run. So it will be like, hey, my chest is tight, or hey, I'm stimming a lot, or whatever like that, right? And sometimes if you are able to clock like, oh, I'm having this body response, that is sometimes something that goes with this thing, that can be one way to access it. And I think like approaching this with, hey, we have different brains. It is not weird that we would need to integrate this information about our feelings content in different ways is really helpful. And I think the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking is just like, how many of my clients have felt like their experience has needed to be flattened, or they've needed to feel one feeling at once? And that is just not how feelings work. It is weird to only feel one feeling at once. Like people feel contradictory feelings. People tend to feel feelings like you can feel happy and sad at the same time. Have you been to a funeral? That is like a common thing. It's not weird to feel contradictory feelings. And I think having space for that ambivalence and making it a normalized thing in therapy is deeply important, and making people know that, hey, that's not you being bad at feelings. That's therapy not having good language for your complex experience, and therapy needs to catch up to you.
Yes, please. Absolutely.
We're working on it.
So I want to dip into I believe you're developing your own modality as well, which I'm super psyched about. It's interesting too. I had a great therapist who hilariously I shared with a friend of mine, and then I took a break. And then when I came back, she was like, I can't work with you anymore because there's now a conflict. Your friend and you're very close friends, and occasionally she talks about you. I can't have that. I was like, well, that's what I get for sharing my therapist with my friends. You stole her from me.
Oh my God.
But it was mostly funny. And my therapist was really sweet, actually. As an exit interview, we did all of our therapy over Zoom, but we actually went for a walk with me, her, and her tiny little dog. And it was really sweet to actually have a 3-dimensional picture of her for the first time as like an exit interview, and just as a where do I want to go thing. It was really wonderful. So I know you're developing your own modality, but I'm curious, what modalities are you currently working with, or what are you trained in?
So I accidentally started using my own modality before I realized I had accidentally. And that isn't to say that I'm trained in. I would say I am a Rogerian at heart, right? So relational therapy is where my heart is. That is like a very big part of my therapy. So person-centered work and meeting the client where they are, like that. And then I tend to use a lot of tools from psychodynamic approaches because my clients have a lot of childhood trauma. As anyone who grows up not knowing they are autistic, it makes a lot of sense that we would have a lot of developmental trauma attached to that. And so a psychodynamic approach is a really helpful thing. And I have a really strong psychodynamic background. I realized I was integrating a lot of those tools. And then a lot of my clients dissociate really frequently. That is a really common experience when we have a lot of trauma. It is really common when we are autistic, to be frank. Like the world is really dysregulating. It makes a lot of sense to need to take breaks. Also, a lot of my clients have a lot of chronic pain. Like it makes a lot of sense that a lot of my clients are having a lot of dissociative experiences. So I do not like CBT. I'm not a behaviorist. I have many autistic people really complex feelings about behaviorism.
Right.
Yeah, that is probably outside the scope of this show to like unpack.
Well, I don't know. I think actually I welcome us to briefly talk about CBT, because when I lived in the UK, that was the only thing that was available. Group CBT was the only thing that was available for me. And that was uniquely, perfectly the wrong thing for me. Perfectly the wrong thing. Sitting in a group of people, which was a problem for me to begin with, like in a circle, in a room, like AA style. And then having, oh, well, if you feel one thing, just feel something different. I was like, I can't gaslight myself into being happy.
And it's not a helpful intervention, right? I think it also asks you to pathologize your brain in a way that is really unkind. I think in a lot of times too, like in behaviorism, and this isn't universal. I am not saying that all behaviorists are like that. That would be a painting behaviorist with a wildly unkind and unfair brush. I would not do that. But I do think historically among behaviorists, there has been a tendency to identify some behaviors as maladaptive or bad, and that we try to get rid of those behaviors. I find that very troubling as a person who has a lot of those behaviors. I do not find that client-centered. I find that very aggressive to clients. So, but I do a lot of things about cognitive therapy. I think it is good to know about mindfulness. I think it is good to be able to do grounding. And I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so for me, developing a lot of grounding strategies that have been really helpful for people that maybe are like, no, CBT is not for me. I don't want any of that behaviorism stuff. Fair. I don't either. No, thank you. But I do want you to be able to ground. I want you to be able to come back if you want to. I want you to know that there are different types of grounding that aren't just physical. I want you to be able to do relational grounding. I want you to be able to do cognitive grounding. And I think so a lot of my work is informed by cognitive grounding too. So what I have developed, or what I'm calling it right now, I don't know if this is the permanent name, but I call it cognitive depth therapy because it is basically combining those three traditions. It's the relational tradition, the psychodynamic tradition, and the humanist, or I guess the humanist tradition, the psychodynamic tradition, and the cognitive tradition, if we want to call it that. And like, how do all of those things intersect and inform each other? So having a toolbox full of multi-tools, basically.
Right. I love that. Yeah. And so I have 30 questions I want to ask you.
That's good.
Yeah, no, it's great, except I'm trying to figure out where to start. How is what you do to work with your clients different or unusual compared to what many other therapists might do?
I think part of it is that it is, and I am not in the room with other therapists. I think that is part of it too. And I think a lot of other therapists do what I do. I think that is the first thing I want to acknowledge. I think the biggest difference right now is that I'm formalizing it, to be honest. Because I think there are a lot of therapists that do exactly what I'm doing, who are integrative therapists, who are taking like the good parts of different traditions, all that kind of stuff. And I think that I love those therapists. Those are my favorite therapists to work with. And so like a lot of times when I'm talking to people, they're like, oh, yeah, that resonates. That sounds really good. But I think what is different about this specific thing is that I am formalizing it, and I am really formalizing a lot of the interventions and making them like really structured so I can teach them to other people. I think that is the thing, and making them replicable so that someone who maybe doesn't have the same background and the lived experience and isn't as big of a nerd about all these different things and maybe wouldn't go down all the different rabbit holes of, okay, I have a client with these specific needs, let me go down it. I don't want someone to have to reinvent the wheel like this every fucking time. That is like, it's been hard. I wouldn't want to oversell the novelty of what I am doing. I think it is much more integrating. It's a synthesis that is, the synthesis is novel. And I think formalizing the interventions are novel. But like in terms of, is it all new ideas? No. A lot of integrative therapists do a lot of the stuff I'm doing. But I think it is more, I am formalizing an integrative modality.
Yeah. And what is the purpose of that modality? Who benefits the most from this?
So I started my career in local mental health authority land. And that is where I started to develop these tools, is with folks that are typically very underserved. And a lot of work with folks that had substance use disorders and a lot of folks that had a lot of trauma. I have found these tools very helpful for those populations. And I also have found them, unsurprisingly, very helpful for my clients, so autistic adults. I definitely have built the modality as I've been formalizing it for autistic adults. That is something that is really important for me. But it is a generalizable modality. It is inherently one because I developed it at the local mental health authority as I was providing care for lots and lots of people from really diverse backgrounds. But I think the people who I find it most helpful for, and the tools that I have developed, I think that are most helpful are probably for people who dissociate a lot, as well as people who just, for whatever reason, have had their experiences and the complexity of their experiences flattened really frequently. A lot of my clients have very complex lives, and they have felt like they either need to make their life less complex in order for their therapist to be able to provide care for them, or they just need to get into care. They talk to someone and the person just doesn't get it. The person they're constantly having to provide psychoeducation to their own therapist, all that kind of stuff. And I like having tools that are really beneficial to people for complex lives, like with complex lives, whatever that complexity looks like.
Yeah. I read a book a while ago that was a guide for therapists about how to work better with folks on the spectrum. And it was such an enlightening read. And I actually, when I started shopping around for a therapist, I said in my, hey, have you read this book? Because I think if you have and you internalize what's in it, we can work together. And as far as I can tell, the book has sold tens, if not hundreds of thousands of copies. So there should be some therapists out there who've read the damn thing.
Yeah.
But I kept being like super gaslit by therapists who were like, oh, no, we can figure it out. I was like, no, I'm asking you a very specific question. Have you read this book and what did you think of it? And they're all like, no, but my modalities, look, I don't give a, I hear you, but I had a very specific question. And I was like, why is it so hard to just get somebody to say, well, actually, no, I haven't read it, but if it's important to you, I'll read it before our first session. I'll even give you the $28 to buy the book. That's not the point. The point is, I think it is really important for a therapist to be able to meet me where I am on a perfectly like selfish level, but in a broader sense. I'm a very intelligent human being. I've read a lot of things. I've written a lot of books. And so I'm like, look, just give me homework. If there's something you think I need to read, give me the homework and I will go and read it. And a lot of the time, the books that were recommended, I'm like, why are you recommending this? This is awful. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I have found in my own personal journey of finding a therapist, and also like attendance and stuff that my clients have endorsed to me, right? As they have chosen me to be their therapist or whatever, is that like a lot of my clients endorse this lack of curiosity from some therapists, or a lack of willingness to approach it with curiosity, especially when there is like this hostility toward how autism is talked about on the internet, and especially things like TikTok and Instagram, things like that, right? Like the TikTokification of autism or whatever. And I think that is incredibly misguided. I think it is like a very damaging place to be at if you are a therapist. A lack of intellectual humility. I think it betrays a lack of intellectual curiosity. And I know that TikTok made me a better therapist. Like there is just no planet where that is not true. I have had a complicated relationship with it, right? Like I would never deny that. But also for my clients, it has been a space where they have found out things about themselves. And if we have healthy rapport, my clients will come up to me and be like, hey, I saw this thing on TikTok. Can you explain it? Like they trust me enough to know that I will know more than TikTok does, right?
Right.
Like,
can you translate this to autism for me?
Yeah. Or hey, a person on TikTok said this. Can you tell me if the research bears this out? My clients trust me more than a rando on TikTok. And I think I am glad. And I think that if your clients don't trust you more than a rando on TikTok, that is not about your client. And I don't mean that in a shitty way. I truly don't. But I
Right.
think that there is a deficit in rapport there, and that is something that you need to develop as a therapist. And I think that there is a way to integrate all of those tools. It's a tool, it's an educational
Right.
tool. And we should be happy that our clients are pursuing psychoeducation outside session, even if they come to different conclusions than we would. But
Right. Well, and it doesn't help that a lot of the academic work out there is pretty impenetrable. Like the DSM-5 is unreadable. Psychology has a deep, most medical worlds, like a word has a very specific meaning. It's a deep technolect. And just like I don't expect to be able to read a manual on deep sea drilling and understand any of it, right? In the same way, even though I've done a lot of reading about psychology, I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and I don't necessarily understand everything. And so this is why we have professionals, right? If everybody could just look something up on YouTube, like I might change a light bulb, but I'm not going to rewire my house, right? There's professionals for certain things.
And you have to like be a trustworthy professional and a professional who approaches clients with patience and care. Because God, that made me think of this story from the local mental health authority. Okay, and I'll anonymize it as much as I need to. But I had a client who came in to like for a diagnostic evaluation, and she said she had a condition, and she said she had the same. And I was like, okay, let's talk about it. What led you getting that diagnosis? And she was like, I had a bunch of parking tickets. That is not diagnostic criteria for anything. And so we asked more questions about it. Hey, was it impulsiveness? What was going on there?
Right.
Is
Do
it
you need to go to an
disorganization?
optometrist, get new glasses so you can read the signs?
Like what is going on? Like, hey,
Right.
and I don't know for sure, right? I wasn't there when she was getting her initial diagnostic evaluation. What I do know is whoever gave her that initial diagnosis did not explain to that person well, and definitely did not reinforce well what was going on with that person. It's possible that initially they offered really good psychoeducation. I wouldn't be shitty about that. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't in the room. But I know that a year later, when that person was seeing me, they had no idea why they had gotten this life altering diagnosis. Like they had no idea what it meant. They had no idea what was going on. And I think so often clients are given words, they are given diagnoses, they are given labels, but they aren't given what they mean. They aren't given any information about how to accommodate them. They aren't given any information about what their plan of care is. And that is not on the clients. It just isn't. It's a wildly unfair thing to ask of a client to like.
Right. Well, and that wouldn't happen in a lot of other medical specialties, right? No GP is going to say, you've got pneumonia, good luck. You got pneumonia, and here's 5 things we need to do right now, kind of thing.
Right. But I think oftentimes it is very, and it's not universal, but I think oftentimes in environments where there is so much more despair, I think in mental health professionals, I think you see a lot of disparity in the level of care that people receive. And especially like in a lot, I loved working at the local mental health authority. I worked with extraordinary clinicians at the local mental health authority. It is not untrue that those are very underfunded institutions, that they are institutions that are incredibly under-resourced and don't have the capacity to do all the follow-up care and do all the things that ideally would be perfect, right? And I think it's not the local mental health authority's fault either. It is a larger systemic issue. It's a giant problem, and it's definitely not the client's fault either. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally.
I didn't mean to go on a tangent, but that made me think about
No, I think I've had a number of experiences around that. And I think that's universally true. Like mental health continues to be under prioritized kind of across the world. But in the US in particular, it's embarrassing.
And I think a lot of my clients express how, like, a sense of relief of working with curiosity and the gentleness.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so how did you end up steering your way towards this group of clients? Like what attracts you to that? What do you find interesting about it?
I got into Autistic Burnout, to be honest, which was really complex and a pretty heartbreaking thing. I had been in agency life for my whole mental health career, and I loved it. I loved working with people who were underserved. And I know autistic people are underserved too. So I know it's not like I have sold out. I want to acknowledge that. But I adored it. And then a number of things happened in my personal life that were just made it where I couldn't anymore. And at the time, I was at a domestic violence and sexual assault center, and a number of things came back that I was just like, shit, I am no longer able to provide the care that I had previously been able to provide. And I had already been doing work with the client population that I had been working with. And how that happened is, honestly, I needed some extra money, and I was like, oh, I have a skill set. I wonder if this would be a thing that I would be able to market. And I found some people that I had previously worked with at the local mental health authority who were starting a collective, like a mental health collective. And so very aligned with my ethos. We try to take as many different insurance providers as we can. And when someone doesn't have insurance, we do a very strong sliding scale. So love that. So it didn't feel icky in the way that I had anticipated going into private practice would feel. Like that had always been the thing that had been keeping me away from it. It's just like this feeling of, okay, but I'm not going to be able to work with like, I don't, do I want to hang out with someone who is like, I just was being a snob about rich people, to be frank. Right. I know that there's a lot to unpack there. I have spent a lot of time unpacking that in my own therapy. But yeah, and so after I went into burnout, I talked to my bosses at the collective, and I was like, I guess the people who manage the collective, and I was like, hey, I think I'm going to come on full time. A few weeks later, I was fully booked with clients because it is a very high need area that I am really good at. If you are an autistic therapist who takes pretty much every insurance available in Texas, you are going to get booked really quickly.
Yeah, I love that. That's an interesting one. Tell me about how you feel once you end a session with a client where you feel like you're really able to have an impact.
Oh, I love my job, to be honest. It is, I don't know how I got so lucky. Very frequently, I have a job where I am not harming people and I get to hang out with autistic people all day. That is an absurd state of affairs. And I think a lot of times I hear much more frequently than most people do about how much I have helped people, how much I have really made someone feel heard or made someone feel affirmed or just made someone feel validated. And I think that there are some people who go their entire life without hearing those words from someone. And I get to hear them like, I don't know, 10 times a week. And that is like a very privileged position to be in.
What a gift.
I'm very honored by it.
Yeah, that's such a gift. I love that. What does neuro-affirming mean to you?
Ooh, I think it means not just like a buzzword. It is not just something that like we do for advertising, right? But it is approaching a neurodivergent person with curiosity and asking them, hey, if you know what you need, can you tell me? And if you don't know what you need, can we approach this with curiosity? Can we do an experiment together and see if this feels good? And if it doesn't feel good, whenever it feels safe to not feel good, to tell me it didn't feel good, can you tell me that? I call it a lot of times with my clients safe experiments, right? And I think that a lot of it is just being very client-centered, recognizing that, hey, different things are going to work well for different autistic people. Even though there are some universal, I have many clients that are very PDA. And so I am not very directive in session at all, which that tends to be a very helpful thing, right? And I also do not tend to put a lot of my assumptions about people's lived experience in therapy at all. That is not a very helpful thing for a lot of my clients. So I try to approach every session from a place of a lot of humility, because frankly, I cannot guess how my clients are going to respond to stimuli or a question, right? And I think a lot of it is just approaching with a lot of curiosity and a lot of intellectual humility. For me, that is what neuro-affirming means to me. And it means just individual care that is very tailored to each individual. I get so mad when I see it sometimes, to be because sometimes it just feels like someone is saying it because they're just like, I'm willing to meet with autistic people. that is,
gee, how generous of you.
Yes, like, oh, thank you very much. Like, no, it is more about, hey, are you competent to meet the needs? Do you understand the needs? Have you approached the needs with curiosity? Do you even understand that an autistic person might have different needs than your other clients? That for me is what neuroaffirming means.
That is a very good answer. The reason I asked it is that when I was interviewing for therapists this last time, that was one of the questions I asked them. And a lot of the time, and a lot of the time I was like, well, it just means I'll cheer you on. I was like, I don't need cheering on, friend. I need help. That's why I'm talking to a therapist. I don't need a cheerleader.
My clients know I care about them a lot. I'm a relational therapist. I'm a fucking Rogerian. Like, they know I like them. Unconditional positive regard is foundational. But they also want tools. They want to know, like, why does my brain fight with me? They want to know how to identify PDA in themselves. They want to know, hey, how do I manage RSD? Like, all of those things are the things they're working on. They don't need me to be like, hey, great job. Like, yes, sometimes, and I do a lot of that, right? I tell them how proud I am of it because I'm not a dick. I'm not going to be like, oh, neat. You were able to go to, or, oh, you went to the zoo. Yeah, any baby can go to the zoo. That is not what I'm saying at all. But like, they're coming to me because of my expertise. And so I want to present that to them.
Yeah, totally. Imagine a very strange world where every therapist in the world listens to this podcast and you have an invitation to them. What would the invitation you would give to other therapists? To put you on the spot, but everybody's listening.
I mean, honestly, I think I would just be like an invitation to like intellectual curiosity and intellectual humility, more willingness to be wrong and to be curious about our field, to recognize that our field in some ways is still in its infancy. There's still so much we are still learning about neuroscience, and we can say that to clients without it being scary for them. But like us being able to admit, hey, I am not sure. I don't know if that's going to be something that you like to hear from me, but like the honest answer is the research isn't sure. Like there's not a definitive answer. My clients appreciate that kind of intellectual humility. And I think a lot of therapists feel like they have to have a lot more certainty. And I don't know where that comes from, right? But I think a good therapist, and that's very prescriptivist, I want to acknowledge that. But I think being willing to approach with a lot more intellectual humility and recognizing that people aren't looking for a sage. They are not looking for someone to offer wisdom. That's not what it is. They are looking for someone willing to help them reckon with complex questions. And if you can model intellectual humility, you can model intellectual curiosity, that's good fucking therapy.
Totally. And I think actually there's a piece in here where I wouldn't mind at all if my therapist says, I don't have expertise in this one specific thing we're talking about. But I would love it if the next thing out of your mouth was like, what have you read? What do you think I should read? What should I go and investigate, right? Because there's this kind of world where I imagine that, I'm not going to say a lot. Some therapists I've come across, they graduated, they got their certification or their license, and then they never looked at another piece of research. And that is fine. Except it isn't. Except it isn't. Well, I guess it is fine for some types of therapy if the field is stagnated. Like if there's nothing more to learn there, although that seems really... Actually, no, it's not okay. I take it back.
Our field is evolving so fast, and the therapy that like I got when I was a little kid would not be appropriate now, you know? And I think this recognition that the therapy I provide now will probably look really different in 20 years. Like I will probably be a really different therapist when I'm 60 than I am at the age of 30. And I would be mortified if I didn't grow as a therapist in the next 20 years. I was a great therapist when I was 27. Like truly, I was a very good, gifted young therapist. I was not ashamed of the work I was doing, but I am way better now, infinitely better. And I'm not unhappy about that.
How do you evolve? Like, where do you get your new inspiration, knowledge, research?
My own growth, I think, has contributed to a lot of it, right? Like, I am a person who is continually evolving, who is continually, like, exploring. And I think it is impossible for your own lived experience to not inform any kind of care work. And I know that's complex. I think we bring ourselves into the room. I think we are there. And I think like how that shows up varies from therapist to therapist. It is not something where I never want the session to be about myself. I don't ever want my client to feel like, God, Libby really had a lot to process today. As I have learned that I am autistic, or I have learned that I'm neuroqueer, or I have gotten into recovery. All of those things have made me a much better and more competent therapist in those areas of care. Like there is just no planet where that's not true. And so I think that's part of it. And then I think the other things is just like, whenever there is something that is interesting to me, whenever I hear about either from a client, hey, do you know about this area of therapy? What do you know about this topic? Or, hey, or just like for my own thing, I read a lot. Ecology is one of my special interests. I'm one of the fortunate autistic people who landed in a field that is connected to my special interest. Constantly researching, constantly learning, constantly going to like trainings and like doing the work to integrate new information and new understandings. The way I am a therapist now is really different. And then I think also, honestly, formalizing my interventions and thinking a lot about, wait, I apparently do therapy in a really different way than many people do. Let me unpack that. That honestly really strengthened my therapy a lot too. Just really unpacking, why do I do therapy the way I do? What are the philosophical underpinnings of me as a therapist? Like, how did I land here? That strengthened my approach so much.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a piece that you've mentioned a couple of times, which is the dissociation. For somebody who doesn't really know what it is, could you explain what the felt experience of dissociation is?
That's a good question, and it's an interesting one. So there are two different kinds of aspects of dissociation, okay? So there's depersonalization and derealization. Both aspects of it are feeling disconnected from either the world or yourself. And there is a whole spectrum of dissociative experiences, okay? It can be everything from, hey, I can't remember whether I locked the door or not. Like that is a dissociative experience. Or talking to yourself is a dissociative experience. Also, things that are dissociative experiences are things like if you introduce yourself to people under a different name. There is a whole range of dissociative experiences. And I think a lot of people are really unaware of how often they dissociate. Because I think far more often when we are talking about dissociative experiences, especially in popular culture, we talk about the ones that are more pathologized, right? The ones that are either people being able to ignore horrific pain for months at a time, or people feeling fully out of their bodies for months at a time, things like that, or people experiencing the world as a movie for months at a time, that kind of thing. But it is just like things that are dissociation, it is just as much, hey, sometimes I have a really intense internal monologue. That's a dissociative experience too. And I think there are a lot more people who have really intense or like frequent dissociation that aren't aware that is a dissociative experience. And like for my clients, a lot of times, a lot of the work we do is just helping them recognize, hey, did you know you dissociate a lot? like, is that something that you're aware of? It's okay. Like, it's not something I want to pathologize. It is a protective strategy. It is something that is a really normal thing to do, especially if we experience a lot of pain, especially if we've had a lot of trauma. It is so normal to need a break from your brain, from your body. But I want you to be able to identify when it's happening, and I want you to be able to come back if you want to come back. I hope that was an okay answer.
That's a great answer. I have quite a few experiences with talking people back into the world from very severe dissociative experiences. And there's some really good techniques and some really good ways. You know them all, I'm sure. But that is when it's very severe. I feel like when it's lighter or when it's less intense, I'm really intrigued by what that experience is. What do you do? If I were to say to you, yeah, I occasionally dissociate, like what is the advice you would give for coming back to here and now?
I think it would depend, right? The first thing I would ask is, okay, why is it important for you to come back? I would approach it with so much neutrality. That is the level of neutrality.
Say more about that.
Because I don't want to pathologize dissociation. It is a protective strategy, and a lot of times if your brain is doing it, especially if it is something that is happening automatically, it is okay to give yourself a break. And a lot of times everyone dissociates sometimes. And I think most people aren't aware of that. The way we describe dissociation among mental health professionals, even like the way we are taught about dissociation in like grad school and stuff like that, it is not nearly as nuanced or nearly as careful as I would, right? And so I think the first question I would be like is, okay, why is it important for you to come back? Is it a safety concern? Is it something where you're like, hey, I really need to be able to focus while I'm at work. I really need to be able to focus when I'm driving. It does not feel safe to be dissociative while I'm driving, right? And that's a totally fair thing. And then I think at that point, it would be like, okay, so first of all, I want you to be able to identify what you're doing. And then we would just talk about, okay, so what are some of the things that you've tried in the past that help out with grounding? Right. And I would get really creative with them about what grounding looks like, because relational grounding, really helpful, right? Whenever you call, is there a friend you like to call? Does that help bring you back? If you are just a little bit far away, can you call a friend? Or do like a puzzle? Does that bring you back? Like when you do cognitive grounding, if you do like a word search or a Sudoku really fast, will that bring you back? Asking them that kind of stuff, right? And then if there's someone who just really wants me to give them like the really therapist-y thing, we'll go through like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that kind of thing, like our old school strategies. But I always try to approach it with a great deal of neutrality first, because I don't want to invalidate. Sometimes we need to dissociate, or at least sometimes people feel the need to dissociate, especially for people with chronic pain. I never want someone to feel like they have to do a body scan or feel like they have to come back in their body if your body is a miserable place to be. That is a fundamentally unkind request and ask for someone. If your body is killing you and you just need to push yourself out of there for a little bit, I am not here to judge. I just need to make sure you're safe. I hope that makes sense. And that might be a really spicy take.
That makes so much sense. And I think actually I'm recognizing that I have some ableism that's alive for me here, where I'm like, oh, no, but I've never heard anybody say that dissociating is okay. And I'm like, damn, Libby, that's amazing.
I mean, it's a spicy take, but I think it is one that is commonly shared by a lot of trauma-informed folks, right? Is it okay if I tell a quick story about my own experience?
Please.
So I was in trauma therapy last year, and I had not realized how much I was dissociating at that time. I had no idea. And we did the dissociative experience questionnaire. And my therapist, before we started, she was just like, hey, anything less than 25% is a nothing burger. We're not going to worry about it. And it was much higher than 25%. Spoiler alert, much higher. I had a lot of.
You're like, I'm gunning for the high score over here.
Yeah, there were a lot of things on there. I was like, oh shit, oh god. Okay, I dissociate a lot. I dissociate much less now because I'm in a lot less pain and I'm not in autistic burnout anymore. But at the time, I think I hadn't ever really heard someone talk about dissociation in that gentle of a way either, where it was just like someone being like, hey, if it's less than 25%, I don't even want you to think about it. If it's more than 25%, we'll talk about it. But even then, you are like, it is clearly something that is not impacting your functioning in the way that you're here. You're in trauma therapy. But what an understandable thing that you're dissociating. You have experienced a lot of trauma. You're in autistic burnout. You are in a shit ton of pain. Of course you're dissociating. Of course you are. Like, why wouldn't you be?
I do a lot of workshops where people are doing a lot of like group self-work. And people are triggered, people dissociate, people are like all over the shop. And to my great surprise, I went from having a self-story about I don't really understand people to being like, no, I really understand people. And I'm able to be there with people when they're going through some rough ass shit because it doesn't affect me. I'm recognizing that this is their experience and I'm able to hold space for that. But it's not my experience. Does that make sense? You're like, I'm very close, but I'm still at a distance from the experience.
As a therapist, that makes a lot of sense.
Let me mansplain your profession to you.
That is not entirely what I meant, but fair.
No, but I had such an incredible experience of just realizing, oh, this is an ability I have that is relatively rare out in a general population, but is also very helpful and a powerful way to connect and show up for people. And it flipped the story I had about whether or not I understood other people very significantly.
Ooh, that must have been really empowering, was it?
It was wild. Yeah, very empowering. But also, it was the beginning of a path of exploring some other things, some other stories I had about myself. Yeah, it's ongoing. This is why this podcast exists, I think. I've been doing a lot of, my experience is one experience, but famously, for one autistic person, like, how many other experiences are there? And people have told me some extraordinary stories that I generally really emphasize with, but also have this moment of, oh yeah, that's a whole different lens into this whole same landscape.
It's interesting, right? And I think like in session, a lot of times it's always fascinating because first of all, you have to be able to both differentiate yourself. There's a lot of this recognition of I have a different life than my client. That is just something that you have to be able to hold space for. But also every once in a while, a client will say something and I'm doing telehealth therapy so I can see my face as we're doing it. And I do not have a poker face. And so those moments I like when it's just, oh my God, I will tell them, hey, this is not, I am showing up for you here. I'm sorry if I was having a reaction. There's a lot of transparency and honesty. You're just neurodivergent affirming. Like it's about owning my reactions to that because it's okay to be human in therapy, right? And it's okay for your therapist to be a human.
And moreover, I think if you're not able to model that, who the hell can?
I think my clients tend to find my humanity pretty reassuring, to be frank.
Right.
At least that's been the feedback I've gotten so far. I think it helps make it safer.
I think it does too. Do you sometimes feel like your clients are doing work for you? Like you have breakthroughs and realizations because of their stories?
I think I am doing work with them. And in session. I think that is probably a better way to describe it. One of the interventions that I have, a client and I totally developed together. Basically, I came up with the initial thing and I was like, ooh, can I modify that and add it to the book? I call it poisoning the data is what it is. And so it's like, if you are having a hard time not perseverating on a thought or whatever, right? And like, they told me that like sometimes when that happens for them, they will start just inserting like junk data. Like they will start inserting junk words or whatever. And I was just like, that is fucking brilliant. Neat. Okay. And so like, I was like, okay, can I share that with other people? Is that okay? Because that's the coolest thing they've ever heard. And then I expanded on it, right? I was like, okay, whenever you're having that, I want you to try to be like, okay, what would the lamp think about this if I were to talk to the lamp about this? Or add in junk data, look around your room whenever you're having these thoughts that you're focusing on and add in like crutch and soda can and stuff like that into the thoughts that you're thinking about. And so, yeah, I think in terms of, especially as I've been in this kind of creative flow, the sessions definitely inform that work because in that way, yes, but I try really hard to not do my personal work in session with my clients because it's for them.
Totally. No, I get that. And I think that shows a level of professionalism too, right? Not that I expect anything less of you, but there's this thing where you're like, oh, like maybe you mentally bookmark the thing the person just said, touched something in me. I had an emotional response. I will bookmark this because I want to look at that later, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that happens to me on this podcast all the time, but I am not a therapist, right? At best, I'm a journalist, which means I get to insert. And I think there's this interesting thing about journalism where like the traditional journalism is you have to be objective. And then Hunter S. Thompson came along and did like subjective journalism, where he's I am the story, or I'm part of the story, or I'm driving the story forward. And it turns out that is a lot more readable to a lot of people. And so I think the beauty of a podcast is that I get to make up the rules, right? I get to tell my stories. I get to hear your stories. And it becomes like a more dialogue rather than most of the other podcasts I've ever run have all been interview podcasts where if I talk more than 10% of the time, I'm doing it wrong kind of thing. I'm like, no, there's no rules here. I get to make my own rules.
I love that. And something I was thinking about too, as you were talking, is part of why I left the job at the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Resource Center is because while I was working with clients, I was able to individuate, right? Like I was able to be like, hey, we are having different stories. The story is not mine. The story is not reflected in me, all this kind of stuff. But it got harder and harder to leave the work at the agency. Like it got more and more activating. And I think everyone comes up in different fields where there is just a time where it's just, hey, this is hurting too bad. These are demons that like I need to do more work on before I am in this field. And for me, stuff surrounding domestic violence and abuse was just that. I was not in the space. I had not done the work yet on that for me to be able to do that work safely.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it depends on like kind of for this work about working with neurodivergent autistic adults. I have unpacked my shit with that. That is a suitcase I have unpacked and repacked. It's a suitcase I feel really comfortable with. I have a lot of tools in that toolbox. It is work I enjoy and feel confident in, right? And that was comforting. And my work in all the other agencies has informed it a lot. It has given me a lot of, I'm so glad I worked at the local mental health authority and in domestic, because autistic people experience all these other things, right? I am
in alarmingly high numbers. Yeah.
Yes. And so me having a lot of competency about domestic violence, about sexual assault, incredibly important, incredibly helpful in my field and in the work I'm doing now. I am a much better fit for this job than I was for the other one. And it is a much better job for my mental health.
Yeah, totally. And if you feel yourself cruising towards compassion fatigue, that's not helpful.
No.
That's not helpful.
I was burning out like a Roman candle. It was awful.
Yeah. Yeah, I was a police officer for a while, and eventually you recognize the name of the address and you go, oh, fuck, here we go again. One of them is going to get arrested tonight. Who is it tonight? And it's just exhausting because you're like, the saying we use in the police is domestic abuse intervention is murder prevention.
Yep.
And it is just heartbreaking to go to the same address again and again. And eventually you just know it's going to go horribly wrong. All of this is to say, I feel viscerally what you are saying there. It's just pushing a rope uphill, basically. It's bullshit.
Yeah, I loved it, and I was very good at it. It also, especially given the stuff that was going on in my life at that time, it was too hard out.
Yeah, no. Libby, I promised I wanted to talk to you for hours, and here we are an hour later. We've only scraped the surface, but I'm going to, in respect to your time and those of our listeners, I'm going to call it. I like to end these with two specific questions that I ask to every one of my guests. And the first one is, what do you wish muggles knew about autism?
I think it is both a disability and a neurotype, and those aren't mutually exclusive and those aren't incompatible at all. And so someone can have a lot of pride in being autistic. Someone can love being autistic. They still require accommodation. They still require support. And I think acting like those ideas are intention is a deeply harmful thing for our community.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to spend some time thinking with that. I feel like that's really important. And the final question, can you tell me of a time when you were seen and loved in exactly the right way for you?
Yes, my lovely partner, Wyatt. I had a really bad recurrence of PTSD when we had not been together for nearly as long as you would expect given the story. And there was a choice that I had between either going back to a really bad situation or a situation that would have been much less healthy for me, or moving in with him. And we moved in together. And this man just has cared for me and been able to see me the entire time. And that love has just made me blossom. And it is not about me being not autistic. He loves my brain so much. And this is the first home where I have just felt so safe to just exist and walk around and be goofy all the time and just not think twice about stimming or about existing. I am never looking over my shoulder to make sure I'm not annoying anyone. And I think that that feeling of not feeling both, not being lonely, because I think in other houses, the only other houses where I hadn't felt like I was annoying anyone was when I had been living alone, which I know is a painful thing to be able to say, but it doesn't make it less true. And I think finding a home where both I felt held and seen, but I cared for and had a witness, but also never felt like I was annoying, life altering.
I want that for you and every one of our listeners.
Right. I want it for everyone too. It's been heaven.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting when I'm alone. I live alone right now. I feel like I annoy myself half the time. So there's that.
Fair. Fair and relatable.
But there's this self-acceptance piece that I'm very actively working on right now that I think hopefully bearing some fruits, right? I've had an absolutely grim 3 months, and coming out the other side is, things smell good again. I had some coffee earlier, and smelling the freshly ground coffee brought me joy again. It's a habit I have. I smell it every time. But okay. Something has happened in my brain. I'm able to enjoy the smell of freshly ground coffee again. And finding gratitude in that has been so powerful.
I love that. One of the questions we ask on the MIGDAs is, do you tend to smell things? And so when you said that, I was just like, his autism evaluation's going to go great.
Yeah, it was. I just filled in all the paperwork and all the questionnaires and stuff. And some of the questions I was like, I think for certainly at least 2/3 of the questions, I said, this question isn't clear enough. And I feel like that is the diagnosis. There is nuance missing.
Deeply fair, deeply fair. It was so good to talk to you today.
And you, thank you so much. This is an absolute delight. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of the podcast. We would love for you to connect with us further on TikTok at Autistic FM, on Instagram at Autistic_FM, and of course on our website, autistic.fm. Join our community by subscribing for free, participate in discussions about each episode, and suggest future guests you'd like to hear from. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Haje Kamps, with the skillful editing by Sean Portillo. Thank you again for tuning in, and I look forward to having you with us next time. Cheerio.